You're listening to the Tales of Leadership podcast. This podcast is for leaders at any phase on their leadership journey to become a more purposeful and accountable leader, what I like to call a PAL. Join me on our journey together towards transformational leadership. Welcome back to Tales of Leadership podcast. I am your host, Josh McMillian, an active duty Army officer and the founder of McMillian Leadership Coaching, and I am on a mission to create a better leader, what I like to call a purposeful, accountable leader, or a PAL. And my vision is clear. I want to impact 1 million lives in the next 10 years by promoting transformational stories and skills. On today's episode, I'm going to be interviewing a transformational leader, Sergeant Major Lawrence Ogle. He is a purposeful, accountable leader. Sergeant Major Ogle entered the Army as an infantryman in the 1990s and has climbed the ranks from private first class to command sergeant major. Throughout his 33 years of service, Sergeant Major Ogle has proven his commitment by never walking away from a challenging assignment, even when outside of his comfort zone. He has served at every level of non-commissioned leadership and multiple senior non-commissioned leadership positions throughout his career, to include First Sergeant, Battalion Command Sergeant Major, Commandant and Regimental Command Sergeant Major, and the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy and the G3 Operations Sergeant Major. He is also a part of Operation Boot Crew, a nonprofit organization that supports deployed troops. He currently serves as a senior enlisted advisor to the Florida Counterdrug Task Force and is in the Florida National Guard. Let's go ahead and bring him on. Sergeant Major, welcome to the Tales of Leadership. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, sir. Thank you so much. I'm super excited and honored to be here.
It's an absolute honor and a privilege, one, to have you on this show. And I know I've followed you through social media, and when I was following you through social media, I knew that you were going to be someone that I wanted to have on this show and be able to interview, because I feel that we have such a deep connection and a passion for leadership. And reading through your bio, I kind of humble myself in a way of that. You have, I think it's almost 33 years now of service. Yeah. And I mean, that's truly amazing. But if you could just take an opportunity of define who you are for our listeners.
Well, I'm really, and I want to put this humbly, because I'm no different than the average Joe. And I don't like to speak in cliches, but, I'm really a down to earth type of person. And I don't know if you're going to ask me this, but just to tell you a little about myself, I really had no drive or direction or discipline. So when I joined the military, I found something that I really needed. And it really set me up for a career and gave me the direction that I needed, to the point where, I longed for it more and more. I was hungry for it. And I've been very fortunate with throughout my career. Been in a lot of good positions, had a lot of great opportunities, met a lot of great people, and I really can't tell you how appreciative I am to be on this podcast. Really, I would consider it really kind of my first podcast. I was part of one other one, but I was super excited, and I know I was a hard target to get a hold of. I know you and I went back and forth for about 6 months, so I'm glad to be here, sir.
Yeah, and I humbled that you would think that this is your first podcast. Yeah, it's an honor. So, kind of starting off with of how you define leadership, and I always love starting off with this question, because most of the people that I bring onto this show have different backgrounds. They're either in a strategic level leadership position, like where I was able to interview David Petraeus, or someone who is like in an entrepreneurial space. And everyone has a different definition of leadership. But you're one of the first senior non-commissioned officers that's really climbed through the ranks of all the way to private to the highest rank within the non-commissioned officer corps. How do you define leadership? And I'd love if you could kind of walk me through maybe how that has changed as you've matured in the Army.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a lot of book definitions out there that that are great, providing, being able to provide motivation and direction and things like that to soldiers. But again, to kind of go back to what I said earlier, I feel things, especially in the leadership realm, have really become so cliche,
Yep.
right? We read these definitions of or regulations of what they say leaders ought to be, and by all means, they are a great foundation. But I've been in long enough to see how that has truly evolved. Um, and, to make it very simple, uh, I think leadership boils down to not the individual, but the team,
Mm.
right? That's really what I look about leadership. My success isn't defined by what I do. It's defined on how my team, you know, how I've built my team and how successful they are. That's what I've learned and look for in a true leader. If I'm going to be considered a great leader, I want to be able to look back and say, yeah, I had a part of this person's life or this person's career
Yeah.
or their promotion or whatever. And those success levels, as they progress and become leaders themselves, that tells me kind of that I've been doing the right thing.
I remember when I got an email from you from your government email of how we had such an alignment almost in a way. The first quote that I've ever read that kind of stuck with me, and I think you read the book through too. It's John Maxwell's The Five Levels of Leadership.
Yeah.
Quote in there by John Quincy Adams, and it just happened to be at the bottom of your email, and it's a sticky quote, and I absolutely love it. But it bears repeating, especially now, because I think it aligns with your definition of leadership. But if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you're a leader, and really defined as a team. I love that definition.
And sir, I didn't learn that overnight. That's for sure. You know, 10, 15 years ago, I was that hard-nosed infantry leader
Yeah.
who still, barked out orders and I've had to evolve my leadership style because of a changing environment around us, not just with society, but the changing environment within the military.
Hmm.
And then add to that, the changing environment of the generation of soldiers that we have today are different than the generation that I grew up in.
I had never thought about that, and that's something really interesting to maybe dig into, because I'm at a point in my career now, and I say that is because I'm starting to see changes within soldiers that I didn't realize before. So when I was a company commander, rifle company commander, and then an HHC company commander versus looking at what the Army is now, my command experience, I think, would be totally different. And I don't necessarily say that the Army's changing as much, but the individuals who are joining the Army are. And that is a
Yeah.
unique challenge that I never thought of, is that the longer you stay in, especially in the military, how you have to be able to adapt to those individuals that are joining.
Yeah, it's been a difficult journey in some ways. Thank goodness I had some good mentors along the way, who now are retired, but they shared some nuggets of wisdom with me about, and I guess they saw it coming, right? So they shared with me, hey, if you're going to be an effective leader, you have got to learn to adapt and evolve your leadership style um, to soldiers.
Mm.
Not, and I kind of think of it like when I try to explain this to people, because not everybody gets it, that's for sure. Uh, but when I try to explain it to people, I think of it as in school or as in education, right? Some students can sit in a lecture and learn.
Yeah.
Some students need to read. Some students need to do hands on, all different forms of education, but they're learning, and the ultimate goal is at the end, that they are successful and they graduate. And I think it's the same way with soldiers today. We have a generation of soldiers that interact differently, that learn differently. And if you only have one style of leadership, then I don't think you are going to be an effective leader. Yeah, you still might get things done, but I've learned as I've gone along the way that I have to evolve my styles of leadership, and it's going to be different with maybe each soldier that I interact with and deal with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I'm really kind of learning that now that I'm at that field grade rank of where words matter.
Yeah,
More so as, as a young lieutenant, I could always be like that fiery infantry lieutenant of, getting hot headed and making rash decisions. But as you grow in rank, you can't do that. And what made me successful as a lieutenant and a captain will not make me successful as a major and then eventually a lieutenant colonel. And I'm learning that. But that is such a deep truth that you just said, is that you can't just have one leadership style. And I always look into leadership as it's a journey. And I know John Maxwell talks about that. It's a process, it's a journey. We're never ending. And that's the beauty about it, is that we're never going to master it. It's something that's almost unattainable until we're no longer here. So we have to
yeah.
just continue to grow that. I'd love to take a time to, where did your leadership journey begin? And maybe starting around, 1990 when you joined the Army as a young infantryman.
So, coming in the 90s, there was still that hardcore, knife hand,
Oh,
yell
yeah.
at you, lecturing type
Yeah.
leadership. And, it worked. And I was very fortunate, although I did not see it at the time, but looking back over my career, um, the way my career started off, some would say was horrible. I look at it. I look at it as a blessing.
Mm.
Um, I I graduated boot camp August 24th of 1990. That was the same time that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Right. 6 days later, after I graduated, I was in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, getting ready to go to Desert Storm. Right. And wasn't assigned to a unit. And I was there with 80 of my cohorts, and they started assigning us to different units. And somebody came in to the tent and said, "Hey, we need volunteers to go to LURS, long
Mm.
range surveillance." I had no idea what it was, but the guy sitting next to me says, "Oh, yeah, man, we need to do that." And I volunteered. And it was probably the greatest opportunity that I've had starting off in my career. It set me up, I believe, for success because I had some phenomenal leaders starting at the E4 level, right? At the team leader level and the squad leader level. And working in a small team like that with as operators, the discipline level and the standards level, not to mention, the smokings and all the things that went along with that along the way. But it taught me the importance of discipline and standards and leadership. These guys didn't just beat us up; they taught us things. When we made mistakes, yeah, we might have got a smoking for it. Then they actually took the time to sit us down and teach us about it and the mistake and show us the mistakes we did. And I honestly believe my time spent with my very first unit is what set me up for success throughout my career and kind of showed me different styles of leadership, and set me on the path of leadership, which of course I had to evolve and continue to change as I grew up in rank, as well as the military itself has evolved. But I think that was the defining moment in my career, was my first unit with the leaders that I had above me, what they taught me at the very beginning stages of my career.
That is a nugget that I want to make sure that we kind of set on for a second. Because I think you and I have the same, different story, but essentially the same timeline. Is when I took over my platoon in Afghanistan, I met them at the memorial of one of the soldiers in my
Wow.
platoon. And to me, it was a deeply humbling experience, and it set me on the path of leadership that I'm on now, and the kind of the journey that I'm on now. But how you were able to turn a pain point of probably your entire cohort, going over there and just being super poopy about everything. Like, oh, here we go. Here goes the Army, but not you. you started hunting the good stuff, and then you looked how you could turn that, horrible experience into an opportunity, and then find an opportunity to go to the LURS, which is a really awesome school, by the way. So I
Yeah.
remember when I was graduating Ranger school, they were doing Rangers in Action, and they flew, 60 overhead with a bunch of people like hanging down off a rope. And I'm like, what are those guys? And then yeah, it's epic. It's such a cool school. How did you do
Yeah.
that?
And what's funny is I'm still friends and stay in touch with my very first team leader from my first LURS unit.
Wow.
Uh, we still talk to it today. He's out. He's retired. He calls me up every once in a while just to, he'll follow me. He follows me on social media, and he'll call me up after watching a video or something, and he'll be like, I remember this and I remember that, and and it's amazing. And I always tell him, I always share that with him too. I'm like, his last name's Casper, and I always share that with him. I'm like, Casper, you don't realize the impact that you had on my career and on setting me up for success uh, as a soldier and as a leader. Of course, he'll deny that, but he really did. He had such an impact on my career and my leadership, I think, from the very get go.
How did you change your mindset? Because I think that's one of the most important things.
I don't know. I can't say for sure that a light bulb came on. I realized as I progressed, right? So as an E6, my leadership style was definitely way different, and then you make E7 and you're not dealing with those soldiers on a daily basis. Right now, you're dealing with squad
Right.
leaders, right? So it's a little bit different, mentality and leadership style, dealing with your squad leaders and your team leaders, right? And understanding that, hey, you have a responsibility to develop and mentor, two levels down.
Hmm.
So I couldn't be that hard. Uh, I mean, there was times for it, but that wasn't that was not the norm, right? Because they're not really developing and learning if all I'm doing is yelling and being hard on them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as you make E8 and then first sergeant, it changes again all the way up through sergeant major. So I think it was a little bit at each level. I started realizing that I had to kind of change and continue. And I love how you use that, sir. That journey,
Yeah.
my journey of leadership. I had to continue that journey and continue to grow it and continue to evolve it at each level.
Hmm.
And I would say it was only maybe in the last 5 or 6 years. Well, actually, probably after my time when I became a NCOA commandant and being on the ground every day with those hungry E4s getting ready to be leaders. I think that's when that light bulb came on about hey, I've got to learn to change my leadership, and it's going to be different with every soldier that I interact with because every single soldier is different in so many ways. Their background, their morals, their values, how they were brought up, what their military career has been. There's so many different things with each soldier, and you can't really be effective with just one style of leadership. And I think that's when the light bulb came on to me that I really had to change and evolve uh, my type of leadership.
So I'm going through a course right now, Resilient Building Leader Program, or RBLP, and part of that one is called tacit knowledge, and tacit knowledge is knowledge that we have that's hard to kind of communicate, that you just have to talk through it. And
Yeah.
I think you kind of defining growing through the ranks as a non-commissioned officer, from a private all the way up to sergeant major, and as you continue to learn that, you knew instinctually that you had to adapt to be a better leader at each one of those phases on your leadership journey. But it wasn't until you were put into a situation, probably bringing you back into an earlier mindset of reflecting on how much you actually changed kind of over the years. And I think, to me, that's one area that I believe the Army can do better when it comes to helping shape leaders and of creating more deliberate time to like actually think through things.
Yeah.
And kind of an example of that is, Lieutenant Colonel. Like before, how it used to go is you go to, the college for like 2 weeks, and then you would get out of that college program, and then you basically would have a memorandum with your command philosophy that you spent probably 2 hours on, and then that would govern the rest of that 2 years in the battalion command time frame. Is that I think is probably a bad word to use, but we suck at really sitting down and thinking about some of those key lessons learned, because you have such a wealth of knowledge. But to me, just hearing you say that, you didn't discover your spark for kind of leadership of what made you successful until you really sat there and you started to reflect on all those young soldiers around you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, kind of thinking back on the first time, and I love always hearing this, is when was the first time that you really viewed yourself as a leader? Because I know you are a lot like me, very humble.
I mean, pinning on E5, going from, being a specialist, being an lower or junior soldier, right, was a big event for me only because I had a squad leader and my first sergeant who I would say we were, pretty close to each other. Both kind of took me under their wing. Here I am, a brand new E5, and I had a first sergeant who I guess just took a liking to me and really took me under his wing, and put me in some situations to develop my leadership. Right, right or wrong, he put me in some difficult situations, and then if I didn't make the right decision or maybe didn't do things the best way, then both of them would share their experiences with me and help develop me. So I first felt it, as a young E5, but I don't really think I uh, understood it to the point and understood the responsibility and the power that comes with leadership until I was an infantry instructor, and being on the platform every day. One thing about infantry guys, they're gonna sharpshoot you if you don't know your stuff, right?
100%.
Um, so I had to be ready, and in the I, just being on a platform and then being in the field and training with these guys and teaching these guys on a daily basis, I realized how uh, how powerful and important leadership was,
Mm.
and I think that's when I first realized, what, I'm in the beginning of stages of being a leader, right? I've got this whole squad or this whole team of students that I'm teaching and instructing, that are getting up and going to bed on my every word, right? And learning things that's going to help them become better infantrymen, a better warrior, and a better leader in the future. And that's, I think, uh, when I really realized, that I was being a leader.
So, I would love to hear, 33 years, what was your most challenging job?
My most, and this doesn't happen very often. My most challenging job was being put into a position that was outside of my wheelhouse, right? I've been in infantry my entire career, and we were deploying over to Iraq, and I was asked to go with another unit that was not infantry as their sergeant major. And I was excited, but I was nervous and I
Mm.
was uncomfortable with it because all I knew was, infantry soldiers. And it was very challenging because the leadership I had was not very receptive to me coming in because I was kind of like the outsider. And I had some struggles with it, but I learned a very valuable lesson. And it's kind of sad that it took me that long. Here I am already a sergeant major to realize that, what, there's great soldiers out there that aren't just infantrymen. And I guess in my mind I knew that, but now I got to see it in person. Uh, so being in that leadership position outside your normal comfort zone was kind of a struggle for me at first. But again, I learned to adapt to it. I just continued, trying to be the example, learning as much as I could. It was a non-standard Sec 4 type mission anyway. So the foundation of what we were doing, I was comfortable with. What I wasn't comfortable with was the style of leadership and the different types of soldiers that I was used to being around on a daily basis was different. And that probably, honestly, really helped me to realize that, Army's way bigger than just combat arms or just, one MOS.
It's probably not as cool, but it's definitely bigger.
Absolutely.
That reminds me of where I made a career pivot 2 years ago, going from the infantry and acquisitions, and the first interaction of me taking over a civilian team, and the civilian team was 40, 50-year-old men and women. Some have master's degrees in engineering that I can't even spell. And I'm thinking to myself, very nervous, is how is this 35-year-old major going to lead this group of civilians? And thinking, kind of having a perception in my mind that almost an imposter syndrome, I guess, in a way, is that I don't have what it takes to lead them. But then leading back on, okay, all the skills that I've acquired over my leadership journey, and I think that's what I'm really hearing from you, is where you've been able to be so resilient, is that you have so many tools in your toolkit. So when you do take over a leadership position, it doesn't mean that you're unprepared when you feel that level of anxiety. It just means that you're stretching yourself and you're having to lean into your rucksack and you're having to pull a toolkit out that you have, but you didn't know you had.
Yeah, and I think honestly that's important. It's an important skill that needs to be shared and taught to others, because it's just normal for us to get comfortable with what we do on a daily basis, and in comfortable even with our own leadership style. And then I've seen it in the past where people get put into a position where it's outside their comfort zone, and unfortunately, a lot will fail.
Yeah.
And not to beat up our organization, but I do feel that we as an organization really have lost the ability to really develop and mentor junior leaders, both on the enlisted and officer side. And I got it. I understand, we went through 20 years of continued combat. We were promoting both officer and enlisted without PME, without experience, because, at the time we needed, to fill positions at more senior levels. And I got it. But I think we lost that kind of, maybe not lost the ability, but kind of lost the precision of what it takes of developing and mentoring, junior leaders. And I think kind of now we're playing catch up with that. And it's unfortunate because I've seen a lot of good soldiers put into leadership positions that they were not ready for. And maybe they didn't have, a good battle buddy or a good mentor. And unfortunately, they ended up, failing in those leadership positions. And I don't necessarily blame them. I think, I blame the organization and us as senior leaders, that we didn't do a better job.
All right, team, let's take a quick break from this podcast. And I want to personally invite you to our private Facebook community that I call Purposeful Accountable Leaders, or PALS. And PALS is a community dedicated to inspiring and developing servant leaders by sharing transformational stories and skills, exactly what Tales of Leadership is all about. My goal is to build a community of like-minded leaders that can share lessons learned, ask questions, and celebrate wins when it happens. And my mission in life is clear. I will end toxic leadership by sharing transformational stories and skills, and you will find countless transformational leaders in this group. Many of them I have had the honor to serve with in the military. If you want to find a community that can help you grow both personally and professionally, we would love to have you. You can simply search Purposeful Accountable Leaders on Facebook or click the Leadership Resources tab in the show notes to join. I am looking forward to seeing you guys and continuing to grow together on our leadership journey. Back to the podcast. That's one thing that it's always frustrated me, to your point, that I think I've been counseled. I've been in the military now for 16 years. If you count, when I was in the National Guard and enlisted, I have been counseled as an officer 4 times. It just blows my mind. And when I was a company commander, and I made it a point that, hey, everyone's going to get counseling. You're going to get initial counseling and you're going to get quarterly counseling. And I owe it to you to do that. And we would create time in our day. I didn't care what we were doing training wise. We would have those sessions. Counseling is just one tool, I think to do it. Other ways like OPDs, creating non-professional workplace settings of maybe reading a book. And a great book that I would use for my platoon leader was Strength Finder, like developing your strengths. Like, hey, making you think, what are your top 5 strengths? And what do you believe that your platoon sergeant and your squad leader top 5 strengths are? And where's that connection? Where are you guys finding synergy? Or is that areas that are bringing you guys friction? But I would kind of love to hear, and that was a question I was going to ask you. You totally stole my thunder. what was the biggest challenge kind of facing the Army right now? But then how can we kind of fix that issue? And I think that's one of the challenges. It may not be the biggest challenge that you see, but how do you fix that mentoring issue?
So again, going to use another cliche, but we got to get back to the basics of mentoring and developing. I remember as a young private and specialist, when we used to have sergeant's time, how important that was. Not only was I learning my infantry skills, right, but it gave an opportunity for my leaders to develop me and teach leadership skills, right? And we've got so busy with training. We went through years and years of 350-1 mandatory training, right? And I honestly believe, and I kind of argue this point with people because they don't see it, but I've been saying, man, we've been in combat for 20 years. We know how to train. Every time I go to the field, every time I see soldiers in the field, man, they know how to get out there and get after it and train, right? So we spend so much emphasis on continued training, right? All these different training events and venues. And again, training is important, but I think we need to start looking at areas that we can kind of maybe cut back on a little bit and focus more on ODP and NCODP. And, we've all got the books, we've all got the manuals, right? Hey, it's a requirement, you do this and we do that. But a lot of times it ends up being, just a check the box. And we really don't spend the time that's needed in mentoring and developing junior leaders. And it shows in some of the leaders today. And we really do got to get back to the basics on that. We got to make the time and spend the time.
I remember when I was a rifle company commander, General Milley at the time, I can't remember what position he felt, came out with a memorandum of unburdening company commanders. And it basically listed all these 350-1 trainings that no longer were applied. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
That was such a breath of fresh air because as a commander, infantry commander, I'm getting ready to train to potentially send my soldiers at the time to Syria. And what I was being graded on was my 350-1 training. And for anyone out there, 350-1 training is basically online training, level 1 terrorism and all of those things that truly don't matter, but you have to get it done.
Yeah. That was like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow when that came out, man. It really was.
It took so much weight off of my soldiers as a company commander to where I could get more time back with my organization. And I think that's a universal trait, especially where I'm seeing now in the civilian realm and civilian organizations and industry, is if you can spend time with with your people. It kind of goes back to the rule of mirrors, is that a leader spending time with their organization, whatever you do, whatever you say, is going to be replicated within that organization. And if you value things that do not align with building or mentoring or coaching people, well, then that type of behavior is going to be replicated. And the theme, that I've kind of heard so far with this podcast is that's kind of where the Army's went. We've been so
Yeah.
busy being busy that we forgot about our people. And, one of the key tenets with the Army is people first and mission always. And that's one reason that I absolutely love the Army, and I don't want to get out. They might have to kick me out one day, is that I love the people and I love the mission.
That's why I'm still here. I love what I do, and I absolutely love the people.
And that's one question I wanted to ask too is, what drives you to keep serving in the Army?
Really, it's the soldiers. For me, I've kind of gotten to the pinnacle of my career. I mean, there is no E10,
Could be.
and
We'll make it.
I don't see Sergeant Major of the Army, in my career path, and I don't know that I would be good at that. When I when I went up and met with Sergeant Major Grinston, was it last year? I think it was last year. Man, the amount of stress that he's under, and all the dealing with all the DoD civilian employees and all the senior military leaders and all the politics that are involved in that position. I honestly, as honorable as it would be to be the SMA, I don't know that I would want it.
You said a word that I despise, but I'm learning more and more that I have to learn how to do it is politics.
Politics.
The older I get in the Army, the more that is predominant, and depending on your success or not. I want to go back to the days of where my salt is measured on my performance and in my team's performance, not if someone likes me. It's frustrating.
I absolutely hate the politics of the military, but I can see in some aspects the importance of it, at certain levels, but I think we let it filter down sometimes too far. And you're right. Politics shouldn't play at all when it comes to performance or selection of people, right? It ought to be based off of those soldiers' performance, and not the politics or the good old boy system that goes along with that stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. Is that politics plays a role within strategic level decision making, because it should. That's part of it. But when you get down to the operational or the tactical level of putting a button to a seat, then that should not be part of it.
It was it was a difficult road to navigate through, and I didn't really notice it till I hit the sergeant major level, how much politics was involved in things.
Yeah.
And learning to navigate through that was kind of tough. And I'm just the type of person, I navigate just enough
Yeah.
to be relevant, when I need to be, and I leave it at that, because I've just, my mother's been telling me for the last 15 years, you need to get into politics. I'm like, no, thank you.
You probably could, but just based on the following that you're building. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was doing my last job before I switched over to uncrewed aircraft systems. I had to go do a speech to BAE out in Long Island, New York. And my industry partner at the time for one of the programs that we were working in, it was like, hey, could you give kind of a speech to, the people who have been working here during COVID? It would really be a bump to morale. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'll totally do that. And afterwards, he's like, yeah, I invited everyone from our company. I was like, what does that mean? He's like, there's 300 people out there. It's like, you said 5 people, John, not 300 people. But afterwards, I gave that speech. And then he's like, you really have a career one day in politics if you want to do it. I was like, no, John, I don't. I do not have a career in politics. That's funny. So
no, politics isn't for me. Public speaking, maybe.
Yeah.
Being being the commandant at an NCOA, I got to do a lot of public speaking, and I got comfortable with it, even though still to this day, there's still a little bit of butterflies.
Yeah.
But I went through that last year. I got invited to speak at a at a veterans organization out in Idaho, and it was actually through social media, and super excited, about doing it. And then when I finally nailed the guy down about the venue and exactly where it was at and how many people, and he says, oh, we're only expecting about 2,500 this year, and I'm like, excuse me, I thought you said like 250, not 2,500 people. So yeah, I had a few butterflies that day, but it was a great experience, and getting to share kind of my career and my thoughts about veterans, and it was mainly about veteran suicide and how we get after that. So I was real honored.
I would love to kind of hear what was some of the main points with that, because as selfishly I say that because one of the whole reasons I started this podcast was I looked at the epidemic in the military right now of our sons and daughters, the greatest resource that our country has,
Yeah.
taking their lives for things that are completely preventable. And to me, it comes down to poor leadership. And that's one reason that I started this whole journey, is that if I can teach junior leaders at a young age what the right path of being a good leader looks like, maybe it could save a life or two down the road. And that's the whole genesis of everything that I've done. Not
Right.
to notoriety, none of that. I generally want to help soldiers and save lives. So that's an area that I'm passionate about.
I shared my story of, which I think a lot of people do, shared stories of my own demons that I fight with. But
Yeah.
basically, I boiled it down to three things. I shared with them that you have to find your passion, right?
Mm,
You have to have a passion. If you lose a passion, you're going to feel empty inside, and it's going to lead you down a bad road. But I said, three things that have helped me get through fighting my demons and dealing with my own depression and anxiety and issues. And it was very simple: faith, my faith in God and what He's brought me through. My family, without their support, and I'm talking not only my wife, but my children. My children, I got four children. They grew up with a dad who was gone all the time.
no, I
If it
bet.
wasn't if it wasn't for training, it was for deployments, right?
Mm,
My son at the age of 8 had to become the man of the house for many years because I was gone all the time.
well,
So faith, family, and friends. And what I mean by friends is those brothers and sisters who have walked in the same path in the same boots that we have. Those are the ones I can rely on. Those are the ones that I can talk to and tell my stories and share my demons with, because they've been there and they understand. That's pretty much kind of what I shared with them. And then I just told them, I said, hey, you've got to find what, you know, those three things might not be work for you, but you've got to find what works for you to help you get through those dark days.
I love that. And there's so much connected kind of with me personally. I develop a long-term growth plan, and I started doing this probably 2 years ago. And three of those things that you just said is part of 7 areas that I want to grow in faith, family, and fitness. Those are three of the 7.
Yeah.
But I love how you talked about passion. And if you don't find something that you're passionate about doing, then darkness is going to creep in. And it's funny in a way too, is when I started doing this podcast and getting more active on social media, of how a lot of negativity would kind of invite itself into your message feeds and like all these private
Yeah.
messages, and then you just have to kind of push through that. But the formula that I've had is a passion, finding your passion, something that you have a burning desire to do that gets your heart engaged, finding your purpose, because we all have a God-given purpose, but we have to find
Hmm.
what that is on this earth, and then having perspective, or a plan, being able to figure out how I can use my passion and my purpose to actually go and make change. I love everything you just said. I would kind of want to get now into where you currently are on your leadership journey. I know you're working on your leadership bachelor's degree. I can't remember where it's from though.
Yeah. Trident International University out of California. Uh, Bachelor's degree in strategic leadership with an understudy in interdisciplinary behavior. And I don't know how that got rolled into it, but I will tell you, it's been interesting.
Uh, so that's a so what made you choose that degree?
So honestly, the reason I went with Trident University, the Sergeant Major's Academy
Yeah,
finally became an accredited schoolhouse.
that's amazing.
Yeah, that and because of that, you were able to, with certain colleges, submit your I forget what they even call it, but basically your military transcripts, right, of all your
Oh,
career and what you've done. The J something.
I used to know
Uh,
what the yeah.
yeah. So once I sat down with with one of the advisors and looked at what classes I had already taken, what the military gave me, and what I had left, it just made sense for me to, and I kind of share this on social media. I'm like, hey, it's never too late to, pursue your degree. I said it's important to, especially in today's military, there are, back when I was in E6 and E7, civilian education was not as big a deal as it is today. Now, if you want to make, first sergeant and sergeant major, you better get your civilian education taken care of. So I've been working on this thing for almost 30 years. I started, in Korea back in
Wow.
1994 was when I took my first class. And I've just been pecking away at it over all these years, and I'm down to my final two classes.
All right, team, let's take a quick break from the podcast episode. And I want to share a leadership tool or resource with you, and that is resiliency-based leadership program. The RBLP's vision is to create a worldwide community of practice committed to building and leading resilient teams. And there's 3 different types of certifications that they focus on, and that is frontline supervisors, middle managers, or senior leaders. So why do we need to build and lead resilient teams? Resilient teams are the key to individual and organizational growth, regardless of being in a military or in the civilian workforce. Building collective resilience teams exponentially increases our abilities to overcome adversity, adapt, and then grow. And then bottom line up front, resilient teams are just stronger together. That's a fact. This is something that I am certified in and that I truly believe in. The best part is it's probably 100% free to you. So if you're in the military and you're active duty, you have up to $4,000 a year through the Army Credentialing Assistance Program to pay for these types of certifications that will help you in your military career, but also when you transition out of the military. And if you work in a civilian organization, you have direct education benefits or tuition assistance that can help cover the cost of this. So here is some facts for you guys. 99% of the people that go through this recommend it to other people. 89% of the people believe after completing this course that they will be better compensated and have better career longevity along the way. 97% are more confident after completing this in their leadership abilities, which ultimately leads to better mission command or autonomy within the workforce. And this one is the most important. 96% of people believe that it will increase trust within the organization. So if you want to learn more, you can go into the show notes or click the link resilientbuildingleader.com and learn everything you need to know about the RBLP vision and mission and how to get started. And if you want to get started, use the discount code JMCMILLION, no spaces or all caps. And this will be something that gives you an additional discount. And yes, I do get compensated for this, but this is something that I genuinely believe in and is aligned with my core values and my mission of building more purposeful, accountable leaders. Let's go back to the podcast. That is amazing. And I'm glad we were able to kind of like tease that out. Over 30 years trying to work towards a bachelor's degree, but you never gave up and you had a successful career along the way. And I think that is the truest definition of just grit, of being able to stick through it. And if you can do that, then anyone can do that. I truly believe that because you probably have one of the most demanding jobs and you've had one of the most demanding jobs. And I'm not going to, because I in the National Guard, I was a non-commissioned officer, so I know the difference between kind of like an NCO, and being an officer in active duty. And I'm just going to say that when I was a company commander, maybe my first sergeant worked a little bit harder than me. It was like a good cop, bad cop. I'm not going to say that, 100%, but it could be possible. We
Yeah.
could make an argument. So what drove you to start social media? And that's where I was able to find you, because you create such inspirational content. And I want to say genuinely thank you, because
Thank you, sir.
when I started doing that on social media, I did it because I wanted to bring light into the world. I'm just watching all
Hmm.
this, lack of a better word, crap all the time. And I wanted to be able to bring some type of light and help someone maybe going through some kind of dark place. And then I found you, and you're bringing that light into the world.
So I first started social media back in 2005, which, I don't think Instagram was around. I don't think TikTok was around. Some of the others, really, it was Facebook was the big thing back then, and it had just really became a big platform. And the only reason I did it was because I was deployed,
Mm.
and my oldest son and oldest daughter, who were only in their early teens at that time, had a Facebook. And I think, if I remember correctly, it was my daughter who said, "Hey, Dad, you need to get on Facebook so that we can kind of communicate while you're
Uh-huh.
deployed." And I'm like, you know what? That's a great idea. And I think this was even before Facebook Live was out there. It was just being able to post pictures and things like that, right? Or videos. And really, that was my first taste of social media. And it was strictly family, right? I got to watch my kids play ball while I was deployed. I got to share some things, while I was deployed with my kids. And that was a great experience. But then, and that was pretty much my limit of social media for the longest time, was just Facebook, and it was pretty much just family and friends. And then in 2020, when COVID hit and pretty much our country shut down, we were all told to go home and telework, and I was stuck at home with four grown kids. Uh, Two of them were adults, young adults, and I just remember. I remember seeing them in the living room or in the kitchen, and they're all huddled around on their phones like they do, and they're constantly
Mm.
chattering and sharing videos and laughing. And I'm like, "What in the world are you guys doing?" And they're like, "Oh, TikTok, TikTok." I'm like, "What is that?" Well, they, explained to me what it was. And I've always been one to be very, protective parent when it came to social media. So I'm like, okay, my kids are on TikTok. I want to check this thing out. So I got on it. And then I realized how addictive it was when I'm, scrolling through TikTok at 3 in the morning. Uh, but I kind of felt like you did, sir. I saw a lot of cool stuff on there. I saw a lot of funny videos on there, but I saw a lot of just young soldiers with no direction, no
Yep.
drive, and no motivation. And it reminded me of me. And I'm like, I kicked it around for probably a couple months before I really decided what I was going to do, or if I was going to do anything. And I actually talked to my wife about it, and she was like, that would be a good niche for you to run with. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try it. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to get on there, and I'm going to share some experiences. I'm going to share some motivation. I said, there's so much negativity and hate in this world.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of young soldiers that are looking for guidance, have questions, or just need some positive, some positive encouragement. I said, I think I can provide that. And I started doing it. And, it took off like a wildfire. And I got labeled the Sergeant Major of TikTok, and it just stuck with me. And I've run with it ever since then. And it's been a crazy ride, but it's been great to see the amount of soldiers that I've been able to talk to and impact that I've never even served with side by side. Right, we've never even crossed paths, but so many that I get to talk to on a regular basis through social media.
Yeah. I you kind of reminded me of Matthew, chapter 5, kind of verse 14, as you were talking through that. You are a light in the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do the people light a lamp and put it under the bowl. Instead, they put it on the stand, and they give the light to everyone in the house. So in that way, And this is a theme that I've seen now through this, is that you were able to adapt your leadership, starting as a private all the way to a sergeant major. But also, that's the beauty about leadership. You're a leader, you're a father, you're a husband, a leader of yourself. And you saw your kids being distracted by this disruptive technology. And then you really started digging into it. And then you saw, hey, there's soldiers that are just on here, have no clear direction or purpose. I could be that direction or purpose. I could be that light on that hill. And you just adapted your leadership style. Again, it's funny. And that's why I love podcasting, because I can kind of sit back from an aerial perspective and walk through a leadership's journey, a leader's journey. And I love how that's the theme, that you are a resilient leader, and it just continues to manifest itself regardless of the technology or the method.
Thank you. I tell you, and you know this, I'm sure, being on social media, there's going to be people that attack you and send you, leave nasty comments and all that. And I struggled with it at first. And again, I'm going to go back to my wife, who has been there. We were married before I came in the service. So she's been with me through the whole thing, right? 34 years. But she was the one that she just sat me down one day because I was getting all spun up about some comments that were left about me or this or that. And she's like, why are you even letting these people bother you? She's like, they don't know you. They don't know your career. They don't know what you've done. They don't know what you've been through. And you're letting them distract you from what you're trying to do. And I was like, it was like a brick hit me in the face. I'm like, man, you are so right. And ever since then, I've kind of just washed my hands of it, and I don't let it affect me. I just try to move on from it.
Yeah. That was the hardest thing for me, until my wife, kind of my rock, walked me through that too. Is like, why are you listening to people who have the hate and negativity? You're trying to make a difference. And I kind of go back to, a leader, you're not, it's not a popularity contest. It doesn't matter the decisions that you make. There's going to be people in your organization that love you, that are, he's okay. And then I absolutely hate that guy. And it doesn't matter. There's always going to be like that. And social media is the same way. There's going to be people out there that just are genuinely unhappy, and they're going to try to bring you down. So walk me through, because I want to be respectful of your time and try to finish it at the hour mark. But I know that you have a really interesting operations boot crew that you've kind of created. And if you could maybe walk through that, what is that and how can people support it?
So it's a nonprofit that my wife and I started. And, I can remember the many times being deployed that my wife and kids and family, and my kids grew up in a private school. So a lot of times the school would get involved in collecting things, and then they would send over care packages. And I know you've been there, you've received care packages. And it don't matter if you're a private or you're a sergeant major, receiving a care package from home when you're deployed makes a difference.
Best day ever.
And so I met up with one of the guys off of social media, off of TikTok, Sergeant First Class Smash Ohana, I think is his name on TikTok. I'm sure you've seen him. He's pretty big. He's got a little over, I think, 1 million followers. But anyway, they were getting ready to deploy. Me and him had talked a couple of times through messages and things like that. And him and his platoon were getting ready to deploy. And I'm like, hey, man, I said, me and my wife would love to support you guys while you're deployed. I said, if you get me your, APO address, I said, hey, we'll try to send you over some stuff. I said, send me a list of, what you and your guys can't get while you're over there. Cause I know depending on where you go, sometimes you can't get stuff. And sometimes there's just certain stuff that you want. Right. So we started supporting them during their deployment. We were sending over, probably 10 to 12 huge boxes, every couple of weeks. And it just, I guess word got out and people started, hitting me up about it. Hey, I'm deployed, would love to get a care package. And I was like, okay, great. And so me and my wife just started doing it, and it grew really fast, really big. And my wife's like, we can't keep this up. And plus people started donating. So I had just mentioned it one time on a video that we were doing a big shipment, and hey, if anybody would like to jump in on this and help out to send some stuff to some soldiers, let me know. And immediately I started getting messages of people that wanted to donate money.
Oh, wow.
Um, so I think it was like within a 14-month period, we got over $25,000 in donations,
Wow.
all towards Operation Boot Crew. That's just what we ended up calling it. And so we filed, for a 501c3 and made it a nonprofit. And we've just kind of been trying to build it, and still, I know we've kind of pulled out of Afghanistan, but we still have, soldiers in Syria. We got soldiers in Iraq, Poland. So, yeah, we try to link up, and I'll see a video of somebody who's deployed, and I'll just reach out to them. I'm like, hey, you know,
I love that.
Operation Boot Crew would love to send you a care package. Send me your APO address, and we'll get something out to you. And so we've just been doing that. Matter of fact, I'm working with a private school right now who's doing a big collection to help us out, and we're gonna send that out. We just did one for Girl Scout cookies.
Mm.
So young girl she had mentioned to my wife that she had a goal. She was selling Girl Scout cookies. She's like, I have a goal to sell 100 boxes strictly for deployed soldiers. And I said, you know what? We can help each other. I said, I'll buy 100 boxes from you right now, and we'll ship them to deployed soldiers. So it's really been an honor to be a part of that, and to do that, and it's really taken off good. And I've had a lot of great support from people all over the country, people who don't even know me, but they're willing to help out.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And what's the best way to kind of find that and add value to you?
So I have a Facebook page for Operation Boot Crew, and I also have an Instagram page for Operation Boot Crew. And then in it kind of talks about, Facebook has our mission statement and ways that you can donate towards it. I just recently did and I had to have somebody help me with it. I guess an Amazon wish list.
Mm.
And I put that on my link tree for both my Instagram and TikTok bios, where people can go in and just purchase, things based off of this list, to help, and then it ships to us, and then we ship it out with our shipments.
Wow. So last question before we get to the final show segment. And I have so many questions that I wasn't able to get to, and it always happens. But that's okay. But what advice would you give to a new soldier that's just starting out in the military?
Today, a new soldier coming in today's Army, the advice I would give them is go all the way through your first contract before you give up on the Army,
Mm.
right? And because I think a lot of soldiers, I was fortunate, my first duty station and contract, as much as I might have hated it then, I realize now the importance of it and what it taught me. And I think soldiers just give up too early,
Yeah.
right? They run into some challenges or some obstacles, or yeah, maybe they've run into some bad leadership. I'm not going to deny that it's out there. But what I will say, and I stand firmly on, is there are way more good leaders than there are bad leaders. There are
100%.
way more good stories than there are bad stories. Just with today's social media, it's so easy, for the negative and the bad, press to get out there quickly, and people jump all over it, and it just runs rampant. And there's just not enough of us telling the good news stories and highlighting the great leaders, that are out there. So I would encourage young soldiers coming in today, hey, don't give up so easily. Work through the challenges, work through the obstacles. I promise you it gets better as you stick it out and you keep going.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. It's time for our final show segment that I like to call the Killer Bees. These are the same 4 questions that I ask every guest on the Tales of Leadership podcast. Be brief, be brilliant, be present, and be gone. Question 1. So, what do you believe separates a good leader from an extraordinary leader?
Wow, that's a great question, sir. Honestly, I think it's a really simple equation. How much are they willing to go the distance to for their soldiers and their team,
Mm.
right? Um, there's a lot of great leaders that will do a lot of great things, but they get to a point where that's all they do, right? They'll take you to a certain level. I think what makes you an exceptional leader is when you realize that you've taken them to a certain point and you figure out a way to take them even further and help them
Yes.
even further.
Mm. That's a great nugget. All right, second question. What is one resource that you can recommend to our listeners?
A resource. So, all right, so I'll give you two real quick. One, and this really could apply to anybody, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be military. If you don't have yourself a good mentor, get you one,
Yeah.
right? They're out there. Find one. Make it a point to find that person that will help develop and mentor you, right? Number one. Number two, read the book by retired Colonel McKnight that he wrote. I had the title of it. It's his book about Mogadishu and his experience there. But it's not just a book that talks about what happened there. It talks about the leadership that went on during that operation
Oh wow.
and the politics that were involved in it.
Yeah.
It
The
was
dirty
an
work.
eye Yeah, it was an eye-opening book for me. And what made it even more incredible to read it was I got to meet him personally and he signed my book. So it's a great book. Not very long, probably, man, I don't remember how many pages in it, but it's a paper book about that thick, easy to read, and once you get into it, it's great, but it has a lot of great leadership stuff in there.
So question 3. So if you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't be so harsh and be more flexible. And I guess the harsh reason is because maybe I grew up in that era where that's all I really knew in my early stages. But I don't think it I don't think it was necessary all the time, right? And be more flexible and empathetic to soldiers, which I think is very critical for an effective leader today, right? We've all been there, whether it been, through the hard times of training or living in the barracks or whatever it might be. But if you're going to be an effective leader, you've got to be able to have empathy. And what I share with young soldiers is what that means to me is, yeah, I can look on your OCP jacket, sir, and see your last name, right? So
Yeah.
I know your name, McMillan, right? I'm talking about understanding soldiers and knowing more than just their name, right?
Mm.
Knowing their family, knowing their, you don't have to send birthday cards and Christmas cards and presents to the kids, but the more you know about your soldier and their families will help you be more empathetic when they bring you their problems.
Mm.
And if you can't be empathetic to it, they're never going to bring you their problems.
100%. That's beautifully said. 100%. So this is probably the easiest question I've ever asked anyone because you're probably going to be the easiest one to find. But how can our listeners find you, and how can they add value to you?
So I'm on global.
Yeah.
Not that that really matters. I'm all over social media. I do have a Facebook under my name, Lawrence M Ogle or Lawrence Ogle. I typically keep most of my Facebook to family and close friends that I talk to a lot. But I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I started a YouTube channel not too long ago. I'm trying to build that platform as well. And really the value I get from people is I I can't tell you how much just a simple comment or sharing something maybe that I said or did, sharing your personal experience of how that impacted you with
Yeah.
me, whether it's through a comment or through a message, really adds value to me because I will tell you, even us senior leaders, man, we get beat down sometimes, we get tired, we get to the point sometimes we want to just give it up, quit, take the easy road, and just the comments and the DMs saying, "Hey, Sergeant Major, hope you're having a great day," adds encouragement and value to me to keep going and keep moving forward and pressing the mark.
Yeah. That's amazing. Sorry, Major. This has been A little bit over an hour, but definitely well worth it. Thank you so much for being intentional and being a guest on Tales of Leadership podcast.
Sir, thank you so much. I am absolutely honored to have been a part of this, and I appreciate you so much and what you bring. I love your Tales of Leadership and what you're doing on social media platforms. So I appreciate you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a great night. All right, team, that was our episode with Sergeant Major Ogle. A phenomenal episode. It was very long, but it was definitely well worth the hour and 8 minutes that we recorded. And I'm honestly could have continued going further. And that's great to be a podcaster, because I can pull someone like Sergeant Major Ogle, who has almost 1 million following on social media, and just elicit and tease out of him his leadership stories, all to add value to you guys so you can learn. I can learn to be a better leader. So what are the top 3 takeaways? It's time for our after action review. The first one that I got was evolve your leadership. And that's the beauty about all of this. Over 70 some podcasts filmed now, there's the continuous themes in leadership that I'm starting to see. And one of them is evolving your leadership. You have to be able to adapt your leadership, how you communicate, how you write, how you interact with people throughout your leadership journey. How you have led people when you first start out is going to be totally different of how you're leading people now. And just reflect on that. Think about that. If you're listening to this podcast, if you made it this far in, first, thank you. But 2, think about how your leadership has evolved over the years. The second key takeaway that I got was something that he was talking about that I genuinely believe of, soldiers committing suicide, or even in the civilian world, depression, all of that. Passion. It all stems from them not having a passion in their life. You need to find your passion, because again, the first phase of leadership is self-leadership, and you can't lead other people well unless you're whole yourself. So find your passion. And I shared the 3P rule that I've shared throughout this podcast, and I'll probably continue to share it. But what is your passion? Find it. The fuel source, the energy to continue to move, plus your purpose, your God-given reason while you're on this earth, plus perspective, having a clear plan and executing it. So passion plus your purpose plus perspective equals a fulfilled life. And you have to find it. And it's not going to just come to you magically and fall within your lap. You have to go out and find it. And the last one that I had was just something that he said that stuck with me, is that leaders get people to achieve results. They get them to a point. But what separates a great leader from an extraordinary leader is taking people to that point and then be able to move beyond that point. And it just reminded me of Ranger School. And it's funny because I have all these Ranger stories. And if you're listening to this and you've been to Ranger School, you understand what I'm saying. But I vividly remember being a platoon leader and thinking, man, I am just not mentally in it. I'm so tired. I'm so sleep deprived, and everyone else is so tired and so sleep deprived. But I had to get them beyond that point, and I had to push them beyond what they thought their limits were. And the same is true, with deployments that I've had. That's what great leaders do. And I'm not saying I'm a great leader, and I know that I have a lot to learn. But leaders, extraordinary leaders, are able to move their people that little bit of extra beyond to the point that they think they can't go past. Hey guys, do me a favor. If you like this episode, make sure that you share, you rate, and you subscribe to this podcast. Out of all 3 of those, it would mean the world to me if you shared this podcast with someone just starting out on their leadership journey. I'm your host, Josh McMillian, saying every day is a gift. Don't waste yours. I'll see you next time.